Hi, everyone. I'm Mio Stevens-Gandara, Assistant Professor of Photography and current organizer for cultural events at Rio Hondo College. The Cultural Events program at Rio Hondo College presents a diverse selection of arts and entertainment free of charge for our community. Rio Hondo's Cultural Events program showcases the visual and performing arts work of students and faculty, as well as regional, national, and international artists. We continue tonight with our programming that focuses on 3 categories: honoring ancestors, preserving culture for future generation, and youth and community empowerment. If we should face any technical difficulties, please be patient. We will work it out. And if you have any questions, please post them and we will answer at the end of the talk. We are pleased to welcome Ofelia Esparza and Rosanna Esparza Ahrens tonight. Ofelia and Rosanna have built a beautiful altar on our campus, which includes photos sent in by our community and lovely ceramics made by our students and faculty. Thank you all so much for your contributions. Esteemed altarista, Ofelia Esparza is a Chicana artist from East Los Angeles whose stunning and deeply meaningful ofrendas over the past 4 decades have earned her recognition as an NEA National Heritage Fellow. Alongside her daughter, artist Rosanna Esparza Ahrens, Ofelia has shared her knowledge and art about El Día de los Muertos with communities nationally and internationally. We'd like to start with a video tonight featuring Ofelia Esparza, which shows some of her process.
My name is Ofelia Esparza from East Los Angeles, California, and I am an NEA and National Heritage Fellow. My mother was known in the neighborhood for her flower making, her cooking, and for her altars. She had a little altar all the time with photographs and a couple of santos. But for Day of the Dead, she would embellish them with flowers from our garden. She passed this on to me, and it was her own spirit, her own passion for her traditions that I was so influenced by, continue to be influenced by. Dia de los Muertos is a traditional celebration honoring the dead, remembering those who have passed in our families, celebrating their life. And we prepare an altar, an ofrenda, with flowers, candles, food, incense, and of course their photograph. Dia de los Muertos takes place the 1st and 2nd of November. It is celebrated throughout Latin America. My tradition comes from Mexico, where my mother is from. I started doing altars publicly at Self-Help Graphics. Sister Karen was one of the founders, and she was an incredible, strong woman. And so she brought me into Self-Help Graphics for the Day of the Dead workshops. And eventually I began making altars there. I have 9 children, and they've all been involved in the altar making process with me. Some with the construction, some with making flowers, some with the installation. And today, some of them are even more involved in the creative process. And my grandchildren have participated mostly in the flower making. It's been a family endeavor.
we're making something that's traditional for our family. For us, that tradition is to create something. This is an offering. You're really putting your hands into it. And when you're making the flowers, we're talking about my grandmother. We're talking about my dad, my tío, Mama Pola, what she used to cook. So there's this oral tradition that's passed on while we're creating these pieces that go on the altar. In the early 70s, Day of the Dead was something that Sister Karen wanted to bring into the self-help graphics work. It is a reclaiming of our identity.
What my mother would say is that we all suffer 3 deaths, and that the first death is the day that we give our last breath, the day that we die. Our second death is the day that we are buried, never to be seen on the face of the earth again. But the most final and dreaded death of all is to be forgotten. That's the essence of my practice of doing Day of the Dead. It's such a universal thing that we share this remembering, having loved ones who have passed, and then teaching the next generation about them. And as long as one person remembers, they live not only in our hearts, but in our memory.
It makes my heart so happy that Ofelia Esparza received the award, because she's someone that we've worked with for about our 20 years of history at the Alliance for California Traditional Arts, for more people on a national scale to learn about the Día de los Muertos as practiced by Doña Ofelia in her community of East LA. It's like coming to the source. She's a first generation Mexican American reflecting her surroundings, and she's making something new.
I love this process. That's the creative process of creating the altars, and also the satisfaction of saying, okay, we're honoring this person or these things as best we could. I like to have lots of things in it, but in the end, that it looks like they belong together, even though they look all scattered. In the altar at the Natural History Museum, there's many vignettes, and they could all stand alone as a little altar, but when you put them all together, they tell a story.
She's definitely a respected elder. People see her as a healer. She actually has a gift of helping you find your own path. She really is a treasure.
Receiving the National Heritage Fellowship from the National Endowment of the Arts is such a great honor, not only for me, but for my family and my community, especially honoring my culture and its contributions.
Hello, everybody. My name is Rosanna Esparza Ahrens, and I'm so thankful to Rio Hondo College, MIO, and we're happy to be here today. And I introduce my mother, Ofelia.
Buenas noches, good evening. Yes, we are deeply honored to share whatever contributions we make for this wonderful tradition of ours, Día de los Muertos. This knowledge or this tradition has something that I've gathered throughout the years, and I think I'm so happy that you could join us tonight.
We're going to share a slideshow right now, and so my mom will be talking about some of our history, our origins, and we'll get started with that now.
Honoring our ancestors began with, of course, my mother. My mother came from Mexico, a little town, Guanímaro, but she brought her homeland with her, her customs, her cooking, and everything that she had learned from her great-grandmother, Mama Pola, who are in these early photographs. I thought I had never met her, Mama Pola, but I found this photograph where she's holding me. I'm about 3 months old, So she is the mera mera, the matriarch of our family. She taught my mother all she knew about cooking, about culture, about creating paper flowers. But she learned from someone else herself. So it goes back several generations, this tradition of celebration, the way it was done with my family. My brother, Rudy, who just passed away last week, and my mother, we all came together in East Los Angeles. I was born in East Los Angeles, but those memories of those early celebrations brought us together in our community, in our neighborhood. And so we continue to this day to contribute to this community where I still live. I had 9 children. My husband was Amado Esparza. He passed away in 1991, the same year my mother did. But we honor them every year in all the altars that we build.
Next slide.
And of course, my children have participated from the very beginning of my making public altars, which happened, at Self-Help Graphics with the public altars. My grandchildren, even my great-grandchildren, have participated in some way in many phases of building the altar. And some of my children are also known for their altars. Many of the large pieces that you see were at Self-Help Graphics in the early years. And it's been an honor to be part of that celebration since the beginning since the late 70s, early 1980s. And so as you see, many of my children have participated in these large pieces that we have been doing to fill up these public venues that we've been invited to over the years.
Next slide.
But we also have done small altars too at home. The process of planning, thanks to Rosanna, who has rendered the plans, graphically, so that it's the blueprint of what we'll be building, especially to help her and my son Javier to construct the altar, which is, it's really very helpful to have this building plan.
Next slide.
And so this helps us to bring all the pieces together that we're going to gather and put in the ofrendas. The altar making for me is more than just the tradition. It's also a spiritual and obligation of honoring our ancestors. And it goes back to, even in my early days at Self-Help Graphics, I was learning more about the tradition from my mother in those days. And so it's come to to today, after all these years, that have formed, this style, this way of thinking and living related to altar building, of community, of love and devotion to our ancestors, and bringing them to life in the lives of my children and grandchildren. You want to add something?
No, I'm just telling them to.
There's a few altars that really stand out, because they don't have this traditional look. This one was dedicated to my family, my immediate family, and it's a maguey. The maguey was a very important icon in my mother's life. We always had magueyes, and we still do. Because she called it the tree of life. And in this piece, I called it my family tree of life, where every part of the maguey is used in life-sustaining endeavors.
Next slide.
My mother, Lupe Aquiles, or Mama Lupe, she's known, and my dad, my stepdad, Papa Alberto Aviles. Of course, they are always present in all of my altars, even if it's in a small piece. No matter what kind of altars Rosanna and I build.
Well, I want to emphasize that is we get commissioned to do altars in different places and museums and galleries, and it doesn't matter what the theme is. We carry our ancestors with us, and they're represented through small photographs, but they are present in every altar that we make, just like the one that we did yesterday at Rio Hondo College, and you'll see a time lapse later on that. But it was especially emotional this year because we're in October now, and we've lost 5 members of our family. One of them to COVID, and you know, my tia and my tío, my mom's brother and sister, passed away this year as well, and her sister-in-law, my tío's wife, they passed away within 10 days of each other, and 2 other uncles. But the hard part, and I know that many of us are going through this, is that there's this disjointedness, the detachment that's happening because we can't connect with them physically, and so we have to connect with them in a spiritual way, in an emotional way, and part of that is with the altar, and really, you know, bringing their story to life and remembering them in this way. So I love this photo of my mom and my grandparents because it depicts how we carry our ancestors, and we're a reflection of them, and we honor them. Next slide, please.
Many of the altars we have done for this one was honoring the women, mujeres poderosas. And the thing that is very much part of these altars that we do in public places is the research, honoring people that we want to learn about and convey their life to whoever views this altar. This was at the Mola Museum, and honoring all these women from different parts of life. Mostly, we focused on women from Latino America, from our community. And so the whole process is not only honoring them spiritually, but also learning about them and getting into the way that they were loved and how they were honored. I'd like to think about the way not how they died, but how they lived and how they were considered by their own family, as a mother, as a wife, as a sister, as a comadre, as a friend. And we celebrate their lives. And this is the wonderful expression of honoring and remembering them, and that the people who view this will get to know them as who they were and how they were loved.
Next slide, please. So there's like a whole array of types of altars that we've done. This one is a Rockin' 2017, and it was a tribute to the Belmont Tunnel. It's the graffiti artists that have passed on, but the Belmont Tunnel doesn't exist anymore. So it was a tribute to that and to the writers that used to frequent that place. And so it was an interesting project for us, and this is what we came up with. Next slide, please.
One of the very moving for me and for my family, this altar, and it's dedicated to Maria Juana, and she was called La Sola, the lone woman. She was a native woman who was really a Tongva but she was not known because she was so-called discovered on one of the Channel Islands, San Nicolas Island. And her life was, the book called Island of the Blue Dolphins was based on her life. The tragic thing is that she was so-called rescued because they knew that this woman lived alone on this island. and they took her to the mainland around the Santa Barbara mission area. And she only survived 6 weeks because she contacted one of the European diseases, and so she could not survive. But they never knew her name because the Chumash people who lived in that area did not understand her language. And it was later learned that she was really from the Los Angeles Basin area, Tongva lady.
Next slide.
And of course, family altars. This is one of the many in Chicago where my family, a large part of my family are. And my mother immigrated to Chicago when she came from Mexico, and we met family members here, cousins, and my Aunt Nikki came together at this altar, and it was a very moving experience where art reflects life and life reflects art.
Next slide. This piece was for Sister Karen. Sorry that the photos are so small, but this was a beautiful piece. It was a 10-year anniversary from her death. Sister Karen was the founder of Self-Help Graphics in East LA. And we intended this to be Sister Karen's garden, where many of the artists frequented. They'd hang out with her in her garden at her home, just a few blocks from Self-Help. And the intention here was, it's called Flowers from Karen's Garden because she considered her artists like blossoms from her garden. And so you see what looks like leaves. Well, they are leaves. They're made out of tissue paper, but they're glued onto natural branches. So my mom created leaves out of tissue paper and glued them on. So it's like a whole tree going on there and lots of organic materials. So it's one of the ones that we're really proud of that we created together along with my brother Javier. Next slide. And then we moved to Forest Lawn. They started, they asked us to help them with Dia de los Muertos. And so it was a nice experience to work with them because they really didn't want to have a big festival or anything like that. It was just, honoring the ancestors. So this was year 2. Next slide. And so was this one, but they're really big. So this was like 16 feet across and about 12 feet high. And there's a lot of space there because at night during the ceremonies, people bring their ofrendas, which is in the form of a photograph or flowers or candle. And it's at night with lots of lights. It's a really beautiful ceremony. Next.
This is an altar where I learned so much and also gave me so much to think about and spiritually and we honored, we call it defenders of Mother Earth. Actually, we're honoring the martyrs who defend their homeland, their towns, their rivers, their forests from deforestation, from pollution of conglomerate entities that come and take the resources with the approval of the governments there. And there many of these were in Central America, some from Mexico, the Philippines. And it was really something that we felt had to be recognized and people had to know about these martyrs. And it's all done with paper. Yeah, so it was quite an endeavor, and it was at the museum in Mexican Museum in Chicago.
Yeah, next slide. So here,
Visiting.
more process here at Self-Help Graphics with my mom and another altar for Sister Karen. Next slide. And another, this is a community altar for Fandango Obon. And that brings the communities of the Japanese American, African American, and Mexican community together, sharing cultural dances and ceremony, honoring our ancestors. So this piece, as you can see, my mom is working on the floor, getting the design done. This is a floor altar, and my sisters are helping to set it up. Next slide. And it's an organic piece. So this is all fresh flowers. And, you know, we don't always work with fresh flowers, but this one was a really special piece for us. Next slide. This is a close-up of a two-dimensional altar. Next slide. And here you see all the paper flowers that we made to make the arch. It's a flat piece, but it's made to look like it's three-dimensional, but we're standing right in front of the wall that it's on. And we even have some of the elements here. I'll show you one.
And it was done in paper because it was in the children's section of the Whittier Library. And so in order to keep it, you know, accessible yet not take up too much room, it was the first time we did this two-dimensional piece. But it was very interesting, quite large, and we used it again in another project that you'll hear about later.
Yeah, it's an Instagram filter, but I'll share that with you in a minute. Next slide. So here this is at Mola, and this is an altar called Beyond the Earth and Sky, dedicated to Mother Earth. Next slide. And we incorporated, you know, the cosmic and Mother Earth, of course, the Hagwad, which is a very mythical symbol in our culture. And a Mother Earth is depicted here in the painting at the top inside the arch that my mom made. I want to say anything else?
It was a very spiritual piece. Well, as they all are for me, especially this one, because it had all the symbolisms of the deities, of the female deities that I so much like to that I'm still researching and learn so much about. And so it was the symbolism is very important in the ofrendas, and when people see them, they tell the story, and hopefully people, you know, contemplate and also question, what is this about? And it draws people to know more about the story held within.
Next slide. So here we're at the Natural History Museum, and you could start talking about the nacimiento. But go to the next slide, please.
It was, you know, the format is very much like the nacimiento. My mother was known for her altars, but her favorite and the largest piece she had in her home every year was the nacimiento. She was known for her nacimientos, and the neighbors and people around would come and visit it. And so it had many, many pieces. It had lots of vignettes, you know, many scenes. And I used to paint the backdrop for it. But it wasn't Bethlehem, it was the little town in Mexico with many, many items, a cascada and a mirror for a lake and animals and villages and all these things. And so this one is in that format. It reminded me of how I would contemplate all these little stories within the nacimiento. And this is the one it's called El Pueblo de Los Ángeles. And we were asked to do an altar that reflected the cultural diversity of Los Angeles. And the different tiers also represent its past, its present, and its future. You want to talk about the future?
Yeah, the bottom layer, well, the very top layer is the history of the pueblo, right? And all the founders and meaning original people as well, and then the other peoples that populated El Pueblo, and then into more contemporary times, lots of icons in the community and from different ethnicities. We even have, you know, music icons in there that we relate to for LA. But the bottom layer has to do with the future. And there's that blue line that you see at the bottom is a woven piece by my friend Val Chavarria. She's a weaver and she's amazing. So she wove the LA River in there, and it's an awesome piece. But what the thing that they asked us to do, as my mom said, is an altar that represents the cultural diversity of Los Angeles. And it took about 3 months of talking about it to figure out how we were going to approach it. And of course, we went with the Nacimiento. But the intention was, because it's a permanent altar at the Natural History Museum in the Becoming LA exhibit, we wanted Angelenos that came in contact with this piece to recognize themselves somewhere in this piece. And I hope that many of you get to visit it and give us your feedback on whether you recognize yourself or not. But we try to put as much as we could. You know, there's Little Tokyo on the left side. You can see the little tower of Little Tokyo on there. And on the right side is Chinatown, and everything else in between. The center is Olvera Street, and everything else, Leimert Park, Koreatown, little Ethiopia, little Bangladesh. You know, we try to put it all in there.
The shul and the Muslim temple.
And the Armenian genocide memorial, all of it's in there. Next slide. And so this is Grand Park for Noche de Ofrenda. Next slide. This is a few years back, but we'll be there on October 24th. We'll give you the link later. Next slide. And of course, you know, we were part of the Coco movie as far as cultural advisors, and they asked us to do the ofrenda for the Coco concert last year. But it was a whirlwind kind of thing, because we did a huge altar in Tucson, and then a couple weeks later we were at the Smithsonian American Indian Museum in Washington, D.C., and then we packed it up and shipped it to the Hollywood Bowl. It doesn't look the same as that one. It looks totally different. But we used many of the same elements in this altar that were part of the Smithsonian. And this is the piece. Next slide. But what I want to share about this is, when we went to Pixar before, you know, to see what the story was about, the screenwriter, the director, and the producer did their homework. They did a lot of research in Oaxaca and Mexico City and Michoacan. And of course, they, with Lalo Alcaraz, did research in our community. And apparently they listened to an interview that we did with the Smithsonian Virtual Latino Museum. And we did an interview talking about how the ofrenda connects the living and the dead. It bridges generations. And so when we met the director and producer and screenwriter, they were gushing, like they were really happy to meet my mom and I, and they said, gosh, we really hope you like the bridge, because that's what inspired the bridge in the movie, was this conversation that we were having, along with the philosophy, or the essence of Dia de los Muertos, is the 3 deaths and to never be forgotten. But this was really a beautiful piece, because all those little banners at the bottom are people writing wishes or prayers for their family before the concert opened. Next slide.
And, you know, I always like to talk about or say this, this saying that my mother told me. I don't know where she got it from, but it must be something that's been said for, you know, way back many generations. So she would say that we all suffer 3 deaths, and that the first death is the day that we give our last breath, the day that we die. And that our second death is the day that we're buried, never to be seen on the face of the earth again, which is so final. But the most dreaded and most final death of all is to be forgotten. And so for me, that is the essence of the work that we do. For my mother, it was important, not just the altar, but it was more on remembering and honoring our ancestors. It was not just a devotion or a celebration, it was an obligation, she would say. And so I've carried this on all these years and passing them on to my children, to my grandchildren, and now to my great-grandchildren. And the really little ones, they have mimicked our preparations for Day of the Dead and built little altars, which I encourage, of course. And so I know that this tradition, this legacy of being cherished even after death will carry on with my family. And I hope it happens with yours too. Thank you.
So next up, did you want to talk about the altar that we did at Rio Hondo? And then after you kind of introduce it, we will show a time lapse. And so the people in our community that contributed their photos, it was really kind of moving for me to see all those photos come in and connecting with people that I hadn't spoken with before in the community. So if you want to go ahead and introduce that, then we'll show the time lapse and you'll see the names of those people at the end.
I think it's really important of making an ofrenda, especially in this time where many of us have had many losses. And this pandemic has altered the way that we celebrate the lives of our loved ones who have passed. It has altered the way that we want to mourn them, gathering together as families. That is so important in our families. And so the ofrenda is a very poignant and healing, almost necessary way to grieve our loved ones. And so I was very moved while we were making this altar, because one of the final parts of it, where we scatter the petals of the marigold all around throughout the altar. And it felt to me, I really got emotional thinking of my brother and my sister and my nephew and my sister-in-law and my brother-in-law this year. And as we were strewing, sprinkling the petals, it was like their farewell, like you do at a funeral. And so it was symbolic to me. And so I hope that many people get to see it virtually. And so you'll see us building it, Rosanna and I, and then my daughter Jackie also came in to help. It's very moving, especially at this time that we're living today.
Great. Okay. So again, thank you for the people that sent the photos in. It was great to see that. Now we can open it up for Q&A. I know we had one question. I have some questions I also want to ask. Let's see.
I wanted to make a comment
Yes.
about the altar. You saw some ojos de Dios in the backdrop, and also the papel picado in the shape. They're called lágrimas or tears. And I thought it was very appropriate for this particular altar. For us, the ojos de Dios represent the spirits and the names of those people that we don't know, that aren't represented by their photographs. So it's for all the losses we've had this year. And of course, we have beautiful photographs that were submitted and are on the altar.
Yeah, that was really great. So the one question we had was, do you have any advice? This is from Francia Pinillos. Any advice for building an outdoor altar?
Sure. I mean, if it's going to be outdoors for, longer than 2 or 3 days, we're building an outdoor altar at Grant Park, and it's a big altar, and it's up for a week. And that place gets really windy or it gets wet at night. So you really got to, think ahead, like what's going to stand up. You can have fresh flowers. We use a lot of silk flowers too, because, they don't wilt and that we take the fresh marigolds and take the heads off and adorn the altars with the heads. So we don't have to worry about the water being up and down, because they keep their color. They're so beautiful and aromatic. But I guess we can say is, if it's outside, make sure it's weighed down or taped down or stapled down. We staple almost everything down.
Wow.
Yeah. And inside too, because you just never know what's going to happen. But I wouldn't leave candles on, all the time. If you're not going to be with the altar, you need to turn them off. They are definitely a fire hazard. It has happened. So,
Gosh.
yeah.
The other thing is, one of the things that is beautiful about all the ofrendas for Dia de Muertos, I say they reflect our own life. They're only there for a short time. The flowers wilt, the candles burn down, the papel picado gets ripped or faded or wet if it rains. Just like our lives, we're only here for a short time. But we build a beautiful altar to reflect our life. And so we hope that our lives are beautiful and memorable, and that we love each other. And so I think the ofrenda represents that.
I love that symbolism.
Yeah.
We have another question. I see one from Raven Sanchez. Raven asks, are there cultural elements that belong or should be prioritized on an ofrenda?
Well, that's a great question. And I say yes. We all, no matter what color we are, come from indigenous beginnings, somewhere way back. Some of us are more in touch with it because we're connected to that culture, and others need to rediscover what that is. But we all our cultures originated with nature and the cosmos. Like that was the main, idea of how the earth moved, when to plant, all those things. And so for us, it's important to have the 4 elements: fire, water, earth, air. And in the altar that you see, that you just saw being built, the element for the air is the papel picado, right? When it just a little bit of movement of air, they just start to move. And the flowers represent the earth. We always put a little glass of water. My mom says that, because we're honoring our ancestors, and on that day, they've come from such a long way that they'll be thirsty. So we put some water there. and what was the other one?
Fire.
Fire, yes, the candles.
And incense. We always have incense. Of course, in a public place or a closed place like today, we don't have actual incense, but we'll have sage, aromatic plants that create the ambience for this sacred space. It is a sacred space when your intention is honoring the dead or remembering you're dealing with the spirituality of our lives. So it is a sacred space that you create.
Mm-hmm. And, talking about cultural elements, what are the textiles? What is the food? All of that, if I were from Scotland or England, like what would be the textiles? Well, maybe I would put a tartan on my altar, the tartan design. There's so much symbolism and mythology in every culture. What is yours?
And I think the bottom line, if I were to say the one main element, is the photographs. And I have to say that, it's a broad statement to say what are the elements, but, the intention and the significance of an altar, no matter if it's a curbside altar with photograph and flower and an object that represents, is the same intention and spirituality. Yes, these elaborate big altars that you see that we've built. And so that's the what I put behind it. What represents your life and your culture, your family, is the most important thing.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. Let's see. We have videos for friends asks, how long do the altars stay up, and what happens to the images?
Well, the altars stay up as long as if they're indoors, as long as you want to keep them. The ones that are outside usually are a limited time. And some altars we've done that are outside they just kind of disappear eventually in 2 or 3 days. So we know that whatever is there is intended to be taken or withered or, done away with. But I think that, what was the other part? How long did you say? I can't remember.
No, what happens?
What happens to the images? Yeah.
Well, the altars that we put, some things are, for instance, when we have fresh flowers and things that are consumed are just, consumed. But we save any photographs that are left in the altars that I have. I keep them for the next, I always put them on the next altar, even though I don't know who the people are, but they were ofrendas. Somebody's remembrances. But items that we have, our objects, they just go back to their original place, and they may be used again for another altar and maybe not. So I have a lot of stuff, of course, being an artist, a teacher, and an altar maker. Have lots of stuff, but it's all meaningful, and some of it is something that I use either in home or in my studio or at our boutique, and then they just borrow them and use them for the altars, and sometimes they go back to the original place.
Great. We have just a couple more we'll do. We have a question from House Finch. That question is, would you say it does not matter if an altar is large or small or very particular? What would you say to someone who wants to build their first altar at home?
Yeah.
So, it doesn't matter how small or large the altar is. There's an altar, you've seen altars on the curbside of where somebody gave up their spirit, their last breath. And those are as significant as any of that you've seen in the slideshow. They're all their intention is from love and gratitude. What you bring into the altar is your expression of gratitude for this person, this being, for being in your life, or their presence in in your own space and in the idea of like, I am who I am because you existed in my life, you know, whether it's a parent or a sibling or a friend. What are the artifacts? What are the symbols that have meaning, that carry that intention of gratitude, and bring those into the altar? If you notice on the images that we shared, most of the altars have these paper flowers. You see them, and they're just tissue paper. But the setting, when we're cutting paper and, you know, breaking out the scissors and starting to cut them and fold them, we're sharing stories. We're talking about, oh, this altar is for Mama Lupe, and she was so funny, you know, when she whistled all the time when she was working, or her cakes and her food was amazing, and we'd share about the jokes she would tell and our experience of when she got mad at us and we got spanked or whatever. And but it's that oral tradition that happens. Like, what are the stories? What are the memories that make you smile or that make you cry because, you know, they're not on this plane anymore? But, you know, we do suffer this detachment, but there's this little cord of connection that still exists. And so this process of making an altar helps to heal that gaping hole that was suddenly left in your life, because we know that they are still connected to us. So you decide what that is, you know, for your altar. Is it a drawing? Is it a piece of art? Is it birds? Food? It is open to your creativity and your heart full of gratitude.
Beautiful. We only have time for one last question, but it's so great seeing the responses from the audience, because what I see most of all is that people are connecting to this because they're seeing their culture reflected in what you're saying. And that's exactly what we're trying to do in this cultural events, right? Grace Megumi Fleming has a question. Are there any specific ceremonies or prayers for the ofrendas?
Well, like Rosanna said, it depends on your own family and your own traditions. Our particular altar, I say a prayer that my mother taught me, especially when it was about her. But for my family, it's something short. But it's a prayer that you wish, it could even be, it's almost like a eulogy, if you please, but if your own prayer that you feel is appropriate. So people read a poem or read something that really resonates with the person that you're honoring. And so I don't mean to be so broad, but I think I have to be, because this is a universal celebration. We all have people, loved ones that we'd like to remember, and I don't put it into a specific box, because my prayer and my hope is that it becomes more a practice that many people all over the world can do. And so this is why it's so open, as far as I know, as far as I'm concerned, and the way I have taught my kids and my family. Sometimes you're asked to do particular prayers or words, and I'll adhere to it, especially when we're doing this for someone else. But in my own family, we gather our traditional prayers or readings, and that's a way, I think that's the gauge to go by.
The other half of that is, especially when we have our own Noche de Ofrenda, the night of the offering, is our friends, community comes into our space and they bring their ofrenda, which could be a small photo or a flower or some memento to add to the altar. And then we come together and share stories and poems. But then we have the naming, their names, evoking the name. So if we were in front of an ofrenda in our space and it came to the names, I would say, Amado Esparza, and everybody says, presente. Presente means present. And so we acknowledge them, and it's like, it's very powerful. You know, some people have like 10 names to name, you know, so we're all there to hear the names and to be present for the names. So that's one ceremony that we do. We also burn incense to clear the space and to welcome them into the space. And then we celebrate, you know, we have food and cherish our time together here with each other in front of the ofrenda.
That's beautiful. It's so moving. I've seen you guys do that, and it's so special. And we're just doing this digitally, so that is one reason why I want to make sure those names were on the last panel of the time lapse, so that people can see their images. I also wanted to mention that Rio Hondo, the division secretary for the arts and cultural programs, is Wendy, and she's a beautiful photographer. And so she's been photographing the little detail shots. She's very busy, but the intention is that I'm going to collect the photos and put them on a Google Drive for those who contributed photos. And then I have those emails for those people, so I'll be sharing images of where your loved one is on the ofrenda, so you can see a little better. But I think, you know, it's so beautiful because it's so intricate, and there's all these little nooks and little spots that you guys have created. So it's just gorgeous. So I wanted to thank you. I wanted to also offer, if you have any announcements, Ofelia and Rosanna, that you'd like to share with us.
I'll share. So on October 24th is the Noche de Ofrenda celebration, and it's on the Self-Help Graphics website for Noche de Ofrenda, if you search that. And that is a time where we come together and do exactly what I just explained, where people bring their ofrendas. It's a night of reverence, and there's music, and I think it's virtually, but there's going to be physical altars at Grand Park that you can visit between October 24th and November 4th, I believe. And so if you're in downtown, you want to spend the day, you know, just walking through Grand Park, you can do that with social distancing and actually see 12 beautiful ofrendas. The other thing that we're super excited about is we worked with Self-Help Graphics to create an Instagram filter on the Self-Help Graphics account. It's called @SHG1970. And on their account, there's a little Instagram icon that you click on, and it takes you to these filters. And two of them are in the ofrenda, that paper one, that two-dimensional one with floating butterflies and floating papel picado. Another one with the augmented reality with the copalero, with smoke coming out, and also a hummingbird. Yeah, the hummingbird with, you know, its magical glitter dust. Yeah. And yeah, the butterflies in the also. Yeah. So those are kind of fun, and they'll always be there. So that work was my mom and I working on from a print that we did for Self-Help Graphics. So that process was like taking a print and blowing it up to 16 feet tall, and reimagining it as a flat piece on the wall. And so we made all the parts. My mom painted all the parts and put it together, and that was fun. So now it's part of like a virtual reality kind of thing on
it'll
Instagram.
be in the universe.
Yeah.
Cosmic. Something very different for us.
Oh, that's so awesome. We can also post links to those things on our YouTube and Facebook pages. So when people are revisiting this recording, which people have asked, will it be recorded? Yes, we'll have this recording up so you guys can view it or send it to people that weren't able to join us tonight, along with those links for the Noche de Ofrenda and the filters, which are going to be really super fun. And I just want to say thank you so much for doing this. I mean, you guys are treasures and really important people in the community and the nation for doing this kind of stuff. And how lucky are we that you're local to us and that I know you and that you came from college. And so I really, really appreciate it. And thank you so much.
We love you so much, Mio. Thank you.
Yeah. Wonderful work you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. I have a couple of announcements for the college. Our next event is next week. We have welcoming our ancestors with Mayan kites. So still going along with this idea of paying tribute to our ancestors and preserving culture for future generations. So we have an artist, Dalila Paola Mendez, who is of Guatemalan ancestry and is going to show us how to make these kites that are used for, as a similar kind of ofrenda in Guatemala or Mayan culture. So that will be on October 15th on this same channel at noon. It's a daytime event. And so you can find more information at the www.riohondo.edu/art and click on the cultural events calendar, and you guys can see that there. So again, also thank you to Gabe and Abby and Wendy and Grant and all the people that really helped make this happen, because I really appreciate it. It's really a team effort to get these events happening for us since we're so far apart from one another. And thank you everyone who joined us tonight, because it makes me feel like we're really a community again. So I appreciate it, and thank you for joining us. Have a good evening.
Good night. Good night.
Good night.